Hello and welcome to Dollars and Cents, the Australia Institute podcast where we're talking about just what the hell is going on in the economy. I'm Elinor Johnston-Leake, the senior content producer here at the Australia Institute, and as always, I'm joined by our chief economist, Greg Jericho. Hello, Greg.
Hi, Elinor.
How are we going today?
Really good.
Very good. So, Greg, your favourite thing to talk about is out. We've got new inflation figures.
Well, today we got important new data for inflation in our economy.
Yeah, 1% for the quarter, 3.8% year on year.
So that is pretty much bang on where the forecasts expected it to be, maybe even on an annual rate a little bit lower than anticipated.
The government had a heck of a lot riding on these numbers. A result in the fours would have been disastrous.
And this is the sixth consecutive quarter that we've seen underlying inflation in our economy moderate.
While the latest reading didn't surprise, inflation remains uncomfortably high. But some of the factors driving it can't be fixed through interest rate hikes.
This is Labor's homegrown inflation inflicting pain.
Homegrown inflation actually halved in the quarter.
It wasn't exactly what Paul Keating might call a beautiful set of numbers, but it was the best bad news the government could have hoped for.
So what do they tell us?
Yeah, I mean, inflation, all the rage at the moment, or talking about cost of living and prices and everything. And so we get monthly inflation figures, but they're always a bit partial. They leave a few things out. And so what everyone's really waiting for is quarterly figures. And this week we got the June quarter figures, and everyone was a little bit on tenterhooks there because next week we've got the next Reserve Bank meeting. And so everyone's like, all right. Last time inflation was 3.6%. We think it's going to go up. If it goes up more than, say, 4%, maybe the Reserve Bank will raise interest rates. So everyone was really watching these ones really closely.
So what did it increase to?
3.8%.
Ooh,
so it pretty much came
close.
in. Yeah, it came in pretty much where all economists were sort of estimating it was going to be. There is, we can sort of get a bit of a guide from other surveys. 3.8%, so an increase. But everyone kind of breathed a sigh of relief and going, yeah, there's nothing there that would have the Reserve Bank panicking and thinking they got to hit the brakes. The other good news from the figures was there's another measure of inflation rather than the consumer price index. There's a thing called the trimmed measure of inflation or core inflation, which kind of the Reserve Bank uses to get a sense of, I guess, almost the foundational aspects of inflation. Because what the trim does, it kind of strips out a few of the erratic things and just tries to focus on
what kind of
the
erratic
core aspect.
Things.
Yeah. Well, the things that have moved in bit either gone up or down a lot, and you might think, oh, that was a bit of a one-off, so they kind of get not counted.
Oh, yeah.
It really just counts on the core sort of movement. And that actually fell from 4% in the March quarter to 3.9%. So it's going down, and it's the sixth quarter in a row of that core inflation falling. So it really gives a sense that, yes, the consumer price index might be bouncing around a little bit and is going up, but overall, the real sort of trend of inflation is going down, is heading in the right direction, and there's no sense that the Reserve Bank needs to do something to get it going down even faster.
So we've talked about inflation a lot on this podcast, obviously, and we've talked about the inflation we've been experiencing at the moment not being driven by demand, but being driven by things on the supply side. Is that still the case now?
Yeah, this is the important thing about inflation, because if you just look at the number and think, oh, it's above 3%, it's 3.8%, so we've got to do something to get it down. Well, it's the case, no, you got to look at what's causing that inflation. If it's demand driven, as in it's because people are out there spending, because we've got high wage growth, because we've got high incomes and people are feeling rich, feeling flush, there's lots of investment in the economy, everything's running hot, well then, yeah, interest rate rises are going to help bring prices down because interest rate rises slow the economy because
people feel a bit poorer.
Yeah, well,
spend less.
you kind of are poorer because you have to spend money on your mortgage. You can't put that off to another day. Sorry, the bank says, where's my money? And that means you've got less money to spend on other things.
Yeah.
And because you've got less money to spend on other things, the business in shops and various other places is not as busy. If that was what is driving the inflation, then you think, yep, okay. But as we've been saying, kind of a bit ad nauseum. And originally we here at the Australia Institute were one of the lone sort of drummers on this. We were saying, no, that's not what's going on.
Are there
here.
other people agreeing with us now?
Yeah, I think generally there's a sense of everyone going, even though it went from 3.6% to 3.8%, no, the Reserve Bank shouldn't do anything here because when you look at the figures, it really wasn't demand. And there were a few erratic things in the June quarter. There was a big jump in international travel prices, but that was because the previous month there was a big fall and they sort of bounced up and down a bit. There was big increase in fruit and vegetables, which it's not because everyone wanted to eat apples and was eating a lot more beans and peas and things. It's just, fluctuations in weather have an impact on the prices of fruit and vegetables. And so that's not something where you'd say, it's prices are going up because everyone's feeling rich. So they go, we're rich, so let's go buy carrots.
Inflation isn't going to fix the weather.
Yeah, exactly. But if we drink down, what else is there? Big driver, rents. Rents was the huge driver of prices over the past year. Other things over the past year, tobacco. Now, tobacco's got nothing to do with demand. It's got to do with government excise.
Yeah.
So that's not something that you can say, we got to, if we raise interest rates, tobacco prices come down. They've got nothing to do with it.
That's not really what we want.
Petrol, automotive fuel was a big driver of inflation over the past year. Again, that's all world prices. Another one, insurance. Again, people aren't feeling like, I need to take out more insurance, or there's a big driver for, I'm feeling I've got a pay rise, let's get some more insurance. No, it's the insurance companies that are looking at things like weather, things like the impact of climate change, and going, the cost of your insurance bills is going up because we're having to do a lot more insurance payouts because of freak weather events and things like that. And other things in there, education was a big driver. And again, when you look at one of the price rises is tertiary education, so that's very much driven by government costs. So a lot of the main drivers of inflation really had nothing to do with what we'd say market forces.
Yeah.
About the only two really big ones in there, there was the big cost of building a new home was a big driver. Now that's a function of two things: labour costs, because we know that there has been over the past 2 years a really big surge in people buying homes and building homes. And also there's been a lot of infrastructure projects. So construction labour is pretty tight, and that means you can get a good pay rise if you're working in construction. So that sort of increased the cost of that. But also with that, big increases in the cost of materials, and a lot of that, most of that's coming from overseas. Cost of lumber,
building materials.
Yeah, building materials. Most of those driven by overseas costs. So that was a big one. But the other one was this dining out, restaurants.
Okay.
Now,
people are dining out more.
Yeah, that's where this gets really interesting, because this week as well, in fact, on the same day that the inflation figures came out, we also got the latest retail trade figures. And what they show is that actually we're dining out less than in the past. So there has been a decline. There you might think, one of the reasons why prices might have increased, there are labour costs involved there.
Yeah.
Because of things like minimum wage increases to ensure people working as waiters and kitchen hands actually can survive. Yep. So that's a factor there. But again, you might think normally that's because, there's been a big surge in people dining out. But it seems when we look at the retail figures, in the past year to the end of June, we actually bought about 0.3% less than we did in the year before. So we're actually buying less stuff than we used to. And here's the other thing. If you take into account population growth, per person or per capita basis, we bought about nearly 3% less than we did last year.
How are restaurant prices going up then?
Well, as I say, that's probably because there is a bit of an impact of cost of labour in that section because of things like minimum wages, and also because there has been an improvement in the bargaining system of low-paid workers to actually get them a decent pay. But what it is more showing in the broader sense is that we're still having to spend a lot of money. That's because of inflation, the price rise of things. But when you look at what we're buying, it means we are actually having to spend more money on necessities, our electricity bills, our rents, mortgages as well, which is meaning we're buying less stuff in the shops. we're saying, okay, we're going to cut back on going to Bunnings, going to JB Hi-Fi, going to all these clothes shopping as well. That is a real indication that actually people are doing it tough, because when things are going well, we buy more stuff than we did the year before. And the fact that we're not doing that, and when you combine it with the fact that what were the big price rises, things like rents, automotive fuel, insurance, electricity, education, we're having to spend more money on that. So what did we spend less on? The retail. But what employs a lot of people? Retail. Because you got to go to a shop, someone serves you, someone's working there. If we're spending less money in retail, and this goes to what we talked about a couple of weeks ago, where we were saying the figures were showing that businesses were hiring fewer people than in the past, and they were actually thinking, in the next 6 months, I think I might even be cutting back, or I definitely won't be increasing my staff. Well, why would you be thinking that? Because you're looking at your customers coming and going, bit of a quiet day.
Not really worth it.
It's actually been a bit of a quiet week. Heck, it's been a quiet month.
So speaking of prices jumping across industries sort of around the country, you mentioned in your column this week in The Guardian that prices have gone up, particularly in Perth. What's going on in Perth?
Yeah, in Perth in the June quarter, prices on average went up 2.1%, which is kind of huge. If you sort of times that by 4 to get an annual growth, you're talking over 8%, which is just kind of absurd. The good news is it really was a factor of big jump in electricity prices, but it wasn't so much a big jump of electricity prices. It was a result of the state government's electricity subsidy coming to an end.
Okay.
And
that's
so
the good news part.
So kind of the prices went back to where they were a year ago when the subsidy came in. So electricity prices alone accounted for over a third of the total increase in prices in Perth. So it's a case of, they definitely did feel it. But it's not a case of, oh, geez, are people over in Perth flush with cash and they're all spending? No, it's just, in a sense, a sort of a technical thing. Now, that's always the problem with subsidies. We've certainly argued in the past that subsidies can help reduce inflation. Problem is when those subsidies come off, it does create a bump.
Yeah.
But you might think, oh, well, then that negates the whole reason for doing. But the thing is, you bring in the subsidies when inflation is high, and that helps bring it down. And when the subsidy comes off, inflation is already lower, and so it's actually not having as big a impact on sort of the out as it did sort of when you were coming in with it.
On the end. So how much does the high inflation figure in Perth affect the rest of the country's inflation?
Yeah, well, I mean, inflation is, when we talk about 3.8%, that's the average, a weighted average. So they sort of weighted in terms of how much we spend, a weighted average of every capital city. And a reminder, and I pointed this out before, and I think a lot of people are unaware of it, but inflation, when you hear about that 3.8%, we only care about capital cities. If you live in Wollongong, Wagga Wagga, Murray Bridge, Port Augusta, Broome, Cairns, sorry, you're not being counted.
Oh,
so
really?
If you're looking at, if you're in Alice Springs and you're going, I reckon my prices went up by more than 3.8%, probably. They were not counted in this figure. Same if you're in Cairns. And having lived in Cairns for a decade, I can tell you, there's often a real disconnect. And it's something that people kind of are unaware of, that it is just a capital city thing. Now, look, they do that because it's almost impractical to be able to gather all the prices of bread in every
single
every
country
little
town.
Town. So, and the reality is Australia, because so much of our population is in capital cities, it is a good reflection of overall price growth, but it's always worth bearing in mind. But what that means is that Perth had this big boost that contributes to the overall number. So if, for example, Perth's electricity subsidies hadn't come off, there wouldn't have been such a big increase in Perth inflation in the past quarter. So that meant inflation overall wouldn't have been as big, and we probably would have had maybe a 3.6, 3.7% increase in inflation rather than 3.8, and people would be going, oh, things are, And that's why the Reserve Bank likes to look at the underlying inflation, that TRIM measure, because that kind of strips out that, there was a big jump in electricity prices. We know why that was. That was sort of abnormal. That doesn't get counted. and they can say, oh, it's still going down. It's going down slowly, but it's going down.
So the inflation overall is still very much not because people are out buying things in the shops. It's all due to supply side factors. Do you think the RBA is going to keep rates on hold? I mean, I hate to make you make a prediction.
Yeah,
but
look, I mean, I've been saying for a fair while now that I think the Reserve Bank's going to keep rates on hold for a while rather than actually increase them. That something really abnormal would have to go for them to raise rates again. We're not seeing that. They'd be looking at the retail figures and going, cripes, we're buying less than we were a year ago. That's not a sign of people feeling, that's not a sign of any demand that we have to crush. Demand is already crushed. And you might think, okay, well, they like raising interest rates because that has the effect they hope of reducing wage growth because fewer people are being employed and everything. But they might look at that and go, well, actually, that's not really due to a market forces wage growth. It's due to the fact that the minimum wage has been, increased, that companies are responding to that and various things. And so even though the latest minimum wage is yet to take hold, but, it's those type of things where they're looking at it, they're going, well, when we look at overall wage growth, it seems to have peaked, so that's not a thing. Unemployment's ticking upwards, and it's been slowly ticking upwards for 6 to 7 months. And so they think, well, it doesn't sound like an economy that's on fire, that's, going, we got to
douse with water.
Yeah, it's a case of maybe we'll just hold off. So I would, and that seems to be the belief of most economists, that these figures came out. There was nothing, it would have had to have been over 4%, I think, for the Reserve Bank to do anything. It would be a shock if they raised interest rates, and there would be some pretty tough questions for Michelle Bullock of why did you do this?
Yeah.
What is it about the economy that you think is overheating? And I think it sort of starts turning the question now, and I don't think they'll do it next week, but, if wage growth keeps going down, if unemployment keeps going up, at what point does the Reserve Bank say, actually, now we've got to start helping the economy and cutting rates? So because we got both of those sort of questions around at the moment, if I was the Reserve Bank, go, I'm not getting into that. Let's just keep them where they are, see what plays out.
Yeah.
So that we're not, in a sense, going to get the blame for it one way or the other. We're kind of just steady as she goes, and we can make our move when things become a bit more clear.
At Gold Coast Airport this morning, Rex passengers turned up only to be turned away.
Rex Airlines has finally succumbed to the turbulence, with the regional carrier going into voluntary administration.
All flights between capitals are permanently grounded.
And hundreds of jobs are set to go with the airline in administration. Regional services will continue to operate with hopes that that part of the business can be saved.
Our view very firmly is that we want regional aviation to continue. In some instances, it is the only service, only possibility that is available for people to get in and out, to get to medical appointments.
This isn't a Rex-only problem. The lack of competition in our domestic aviation sector means it is more expensive for Australians to fly.
Rex has nearly been monstered out of the market by Qantas only 4 weeks after Bonza was. And we've got to deal with those competitive pressures.
So in other news this week, the regional airline Rex, which stands for Regional Express, went into voluntary administration. And this follows the other regional carrier, Bonza, going under earlier this year. So first of all, Greg, what is voluntary administration?
Well, I have to say I'm not an accountant, but basically it means we've kind of gone broke.
Yeah.
And we're handing administration over to someone else who is going to make decisions on our behalf to protect shareholders. And what the administrators have done at this point is say, right, we are going to stop all flights between capital cities by Rex. You can't afford those. They're sending us broke. We'll do what we can afford to do, and hopefully if we concentrate on this, we can get the company back on a viable footing, and then, it can go on and actually be a company. It's not completely at that point where they're broke and they're going out of business, but it's kind of we're on that path.
Yeah. So who are the administrators?
Yeah, the administrators, EY, used to be known as Ernst & Young. And it's always those type of organisations who come in and oversee the role. And
when you say those type of organisations, is it consultancies or?
Yeah, I mean, and the for workers and everyone involved with these companies where this happens, it becomes really scary because there's no connection between them. They just are looking at the numbers and nope, we're cutting 300 staff because we can't afford them. They're brutal. They're not here to invest. They're not here to grow the company. They are here to clear out everything that they think is not profitable, not viable, and they will just keep going. And if at the end there's nothing viable, well, then there's nothing viable.
Yeah.
And so it can be a
bit of a brutal
undertaking.
and
especially for workers. But especially when we're talking an airline, it isn't just the workers, and especially because we're talking Rex that deals with regional customers. It becomes also a pretty precarious and worrying time for people who are in rural areas, regional areas, and especially in Queensland, who rely on this. It's not a case of, they can just, Rex isn't there, we'll get a Qantas flight. No, there ain't no Qantas flight. It's Rex or nothing.
Yep. There have been calls for the government to step in to support Rex. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and Treasurer Jim Chalmers have said that they've had discussions about it, but there's been no commitment so far. If they were to step in, what does that actually look like?
There's a whole range of things from just, we give them a subsidy, we could give them basically kind of an interest-free loan kind of thing. Yeah, we could prop them up. The difficulty with Rex and the overall airline industry is it just highlights how uncompetitive it is.
Yeah.
There's two major players, one major player in Qantas, one smaller major player in Virgin, and they dominate. And you can see it in what the administrators have stopped. The capital city to capital city routes, they're the ones that have been cut because they're the really profitable ones because there's lots of people living in capital cities, but Qantas and Virgin just have a stranglehold on them.
Yeah.
And it's really difficult for another airline to make money in there because they just can't get the customers. They can't offer the same number of flights. It's really tough to compete there.
Why do they have such a stranglehold? Is that sort of typical of the aviation industry?
Well, it's typical of the Australian economy. I mean, it's a bit like why do Coles and Woolies have such a stranglehold over the supermarket sector? Why do the big four banks have such, we are a very uncompetitive economy. We have a lot of industries where there are only two or three major players and they're very comfortable being the two or three major players.
Very comfortable in not providing great service.
We can see with certainly with Qantas became, I'd say, rather lazy.
Yeah.
We're kind of like, we're the big dogs. We can get away with this thing. What are you going to do? Go on Rex? Great. Find that one flight a day or something.
Yeah.
It's the problem with when you've got a lack of competition. You'd see a decline in service. You also see an increase in prices because they're not competing with each other. I've been sort of doing some interviews this week talking about Coles and Woolies. Yeah, they're having a big fight at the moment. It's a fight over knickknacks and things that you can get if you buy at their stores. You can get a figurine or things like that.
Collectibles.
Collectibles, or you can go in a drawer to get $10 off your shopping bill. So they're competing over all these fringe things, but they don't actually compete over price. It's just faux competition. But also because of the size, because they've got so many locations, and it's the same with the airline industry. You think about Qantas and Virgin, they've got all the spots in the in the airports where you can actually put a plane, and they've got all the routes, and it's really hard to get in there. Now, one of the problems with this, Rex, there has been a lot of talk about perhaps their management has not exactly been top class.
Yep.
But what this has been a very roundabout way to get back to your question about what could the government do. Well, one thing the government can do is go, well, airlines are public transport. Governments can own public transport. Let's buy them out.
Buy them out?
Yeah. Buy them out and go, we're not going to do capital cities because we don't need
already.
that.
Yeah.
Let's make sure that people flying from Mount Isa or from Rockhampton or from Townsville or wherever are able to do that, and they operate it that way. And certainly I think if they are going to prop them up in some way, they should say, right, we're going to prop you up, but we're going to take an ownership stake. And, governments around the world and in Australia have owned airlines before. Qantas was publicly owned. Now, you can argue whether it's good or bad that they didn't. There's this view that private enterprise is a lot more efficient, a lot more effective, and deliver lower prices. So I would suggest many of the people who have been standing in airports looking at the board and seeing their flight with Qantas delayed.
Doesn't seem very efficient.
It's just a furphy that private sector delivers better services, especially for public services. And so, the Greens have suggested that the government buy it out. I don't think it will happen, but certainly I think the government should be thinking about, okay, are we just going to prop this thing up and get nothing back from it, or do we go, no, we're going to actually have a real stake in this? We should think about what are public services, and if it's a public service, then it should be operated by the public.
Yeah.
And the government should have a stake in that. Look, it's not even likely to be an impact on the budget, because
Really?
all the government have to say is, we're going to turn a profit from this if they can convince the Treasury that, we'll convert. And, if the Treasurer can convince the Treasury, it's all a little bit black box about how this all gets done. Or if they can say, once this operation is back and running and all going well, we'll sell it and we'll get a profit on that. That's basically what they're saying with the NBN, that we'll one day sell it, so we're going to get a return on it. So it's not on the budget because we're going to get it's an investment.
Yeah.
And so, it's not even a case of, this will blow out the deficit. No, I think these are conversations that we should have. You think about the past 30 years, all of the public services that we have lost to private sector, whether it be energy supply, whether it be even sort of bus networks, train networks, whether it be Qantas, Commonwealth Bank, Telstra, all of these things, you're thinking, some of these, have we got better service out of this?
Well,
maybe in some
the amount
in
that
the
people
profitable
complain
areas,
about them, I don't know. Yeah.
But, think as well, employment services. Used to be CES, public owned. Now it's privatised. And what have we found from every report? Yeah, they're pretty good in highly populated areas with people who are going to deliver a good profit for them because they're highly educated and they're going to get a job pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Where are they bad? In the regions, in areas where there's not much money to be made there. And what are we seeing with Rex? They're operating in the regional areas where Qantas and Virgin, they don't want that because there's not much money there, because how many people are flying from Port Lincoln to Adelaide? Not a lot. It's that type of thing. And that's where you go, well, isn't that what the public service, the government is there to do, to ensure that regardless of where you live in this country, you're still able to get access to these things? And we have to also realise, flying is public transport, and if you're someone who's living in a regional area and you need to get to Brisbane for cancer treatment or something like that, you need a plane. You're not going to drive 20 hours every 3 weeks or something. It's just not practical. I think we should think of it in those terms, that this is a public transport, public service. How about the public owning and operating? I see nothing wrong with that.
So you think the government has some level of responsibility here in helping Rex to stay afloat in some way?
Yeah, I think so. And it's a case of, if Rex haven't been operating very well because of their management, well, say, okay, we're going to prop you up, but sorry, we're not going to let you guys just run it and we're giving you loans that you might waste. No, we're going to actually kind of take some ownership of this, take some responsibility. And I think we've got to really have a good think about, what do we regard as the role of government?
Yeah.
And one of the problems with privatising of things is they were able to get away with this line of, the private sector does this better. But what it also did was it meant the government were able to say, it's not our problem.
Not
anymore.
our problem.
Not our problem now. You're not getting a good,
public transport,
electricity. Well, that's their fault.
Yeah.
Your electricity bills are going, well, that's how the market operates. We can't,
the invisible hand,
hang on.
Not our problem.
Energy, electricity is pretty important.
Yeah.
We need it. Shouldn't governments do what things are needed?
Yeah. All right. Well, that's probably just about all we've got time for today, Greg. Thanks so much.
Not a problem, Elinor. Great to chat. We'll be back again next week with another Dollars and Cents. And next week, there's lots of things going on. Probably a bit of on house prices again. I think that's going to be in it. Bit of cost of living things. And, of course, we'll come back to you with whether or not the Reserve Bank has raised interest rates or not. We shall see whether I am correct. This episode of Dollars and Cents, if you believe it, was recorded on the 1st of August. How did we get to August? But it is 1st of August, and some things may have changed. You can find my column looking at all the inflation numbers and have some really nice graphs on the Guardian Australia site. And for more information on what has been driving inflation, certainly not been driven by demand, go to our website at australiainstitute.org.au. My Twitter handle and the handle I use on all social media, such as Threads and Blue Sky, is @GrogsGamut, and Elinor's handle is
@ElinorJ_L, Elinor spelt ELINOR.
Thank you all very much for listening. Please leave comments, please subscribe, leave us a rating if you'd like, and also remember, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask us, please email us at podcasts@australiainstitute.org.au. That's podcast plural. Thank you all for listening. We'll see you again next week.
See ya.